Hoping to button up this 66 Marshall 1973, which is the 2x12 version of the Marshall 18 watt. And you saw in the previous video all the changes on the circuit board itself, which are all, I'm very happy with how everything came out. And I've installed the new power cable. I'll show you that in a minute. And I've made some improvements to how the output transformer is connected to the speakers and stuff, or will be soon. We're also going to test the speakers in a bit, make sure that they're great. Right now, I've got hooked up to my shop cab with ET65 with just the 57 on it. When I get it all finished, we'll do the full dual mic, beautiful setting, and I'm going to get a local pro player in to do the playing for that. But let's check the previously unusable normal channel. Again, there is some hum which is inevitable on that channel for reasons that I went into on the last one, but it is greatly reduced back to how it should have been in 1966. On the subject of 1966, you saw in the previous video that I replaced this tube socket because it was too worn out, and I asked the owner if he wanted me to change these two, and he said he wanted to keep them. I was just able to get some tube shields on here. And people talk about the tonal benefits of having tube shields or not having tube shields. In my experience, it comes down to this. Without tube shields, these things pick up Wi-Fi routers really easily. So, unless you have total control over the environment you're playing in, cell phones, Wi-Fi, et cetera, 5G, it's probably best to keep them on. Then if you get to a studio where that's not an issue, you can take them off if you think you hear an improvement without them. But they do offer some shielding, which is nice. Otherwise, this thing would be sputtering and popping because my Wi-Fi router is about 12 feet to the right of where the amp is. Let's go into the vibrato channel. Oh, I should point out that on the normal channel, both jacks are the same. On this channel, this is the low gain. The lower one from our perspective now, the one I'm plugged into, is the higher gain. Tone circuit on this works exactly the same way as a 5E3 Fender Tweed Deluxe. And that means that the bright half of the tone pot, as you turn it clockwise, it gets brighter, only really happens if the volume pot is 2 o'clock or lower. Above 2 o'clock, that bright cap does almost nothing. At 10, it does nothing at all. But even when you have the amp turned up, the channel turned up to 10, you can still roll a high end off at all times by turning the tone pot counterclockwise. Just a fun fact about how this amp and 5E3s work. Hopefully that gets the point across without the copyright strikes. As with all Marshall 1974 circuits, when you turn the tremolo off, there's a thud. If this were a reissue, I could fix that thud. This is an original. I'm not going to change one of the early examples of the original circuit. It's a shame that all these changes happened over the years with people changing out parts. Sadly, I'm pretty sure that the original Phillips mustards they took out were probably fine. Maybe it had some ceramic discs, which were not. But the previous repairs in this amp's history, this amp's life, were not great. So a couple of things to mention before I show you the transformer and power wiring, and then we'll look at the speakers that the amp came with. The owner is using this with the step-up transformer at 240 volts. Let me power the amp off so I can show you a few things. 246 volts to be precise, which is what gets the tubes in this amp, the heaters, up to 6.3. So 246 equals 6.3. And when I measured that, that puts the B+, the plate to cathode on the EL84 is at 261, and that is the equivalent of roughly 10.5 watts idle dissipation. I could decrease the 100 ohm cathode resistor a little bit to get that closer to my preferred 12 to 14 watts per tube versus 10.5. That's up to the owner. The 100 ohm, which is in there now, is quite good, and I happen to have an 82 ohm 5 watt right now. I could order one, but I think the amp sounds quite nice even with a slightly cooler cathode bias setting. Also, I'm using the Variac to bring the voltage up to about 123, and then I'm using a step-up transformer to bring that to 246. And because he's using this exclusively at 246, and there's not a separate primary winding on the power transformer, so we cannot use it at 110, I've installed this very nice modern code UK plug with insulated connections. Everything to safety, and there's a little fuse in that holder there. Those of you in the UK know exactly what this is, but it's just a nice little touch to have something worthy of the amp, and also so you cannot accidentally plug this amp into a modern EUS 120 volt outlet, which would not hurt the amp itself, but it would, as I found out not that long ago, to my dismay, probably blow up the EZ81 rectifier. That's an odd tube when it gets, it does not want to operate below a certain voltage. I don't know why that is, but it is. All right, let me show you the other stuff I've done in this, then we'll take a look at the speakers. When this amp came in, I gave the owner 3 options from which to choose, whichever combination. I offered to give him an actual jack connection for a foot switch connection rather than having the foot switch hardwired. He chose to left the foot switch hardwired. I gave him the option of running the output transformer secondaries through the chassis to a jack, which would give him more flexibility in what cabs he attached this amp to. He chose to keep that as is with a slight twist I'll show you in just a moment. The third option was to replace the old power cable that was just going through a grommet and then being tied in a knot with an actual secure connection to the chassis. That's what he did go for that. So I've got this very nice Hakko cable gland here, and I mount them so that they don't stick out on the other side very much. I put the bulky part here, which is also the part that can be loosened if you want. So I don't like to have the part that you loosen on the outside of an amp. And then it's got a nice 3-conductor cable. The ground's going here. Normally I would run the AC safety ground separate from everything else, but I didn't want to start drilling holes in this unnecessarily. That will be more than fine. It's not modern safety code, but it is, in this case, literally grandfathered in. I'm using a pencil rather than my pointer because I can't find my black plastic pointer. It's somewhere on this bench, probably under a step-up transformer or something. I just wanted to point out that I would never use a graphite pencil like that in a live amp because graphite is carbon and conductive, or the eraser end because I could actually hit something with that metal bit. But for this purpose, it's fine. So I've got the green and yellow striped safety longer than the hot and neutral. The neutral in this amp is the blue, and it is going straight to one side of the ground switch as a junction. The ground switch is not acting as a ground anymore. And then to one of the primaries. And then the hot is going through this existing fuse holder here. You can just see that. And then from there, again, to the ground switch and then the power switch and the primary. And they've got a 1-point-amp fuse in here. And I cleaned everything up in here and made sure it has a good connection. So this fuse holder looks a bit old, but it's fine. I was trying to keep that white box out of the shot. I've been using these white boxes as amp lifts because they're very handy and they're just the right size, but they don't look great in videos, and that white is a problem sometimes for the cameras. So I'm gonna go get some chunks of 6x6, I think, and maybe paint or stain them a dark color for the same roll. Amp cradles are great if you're always working on the same kind of amp, but an amp cradle that fits the deluxe reverb doesn't fit a Marshall. And some amps, there's like 1/8 of an inch between the end of a chassis and the power transformer. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing, and even the ones which are very clever and you can adjust them all kinds of ways, it can take a long time to get those set up versus a couple of wood blocks, or in this case, heavy-duty shipping boxes. Sorry if anyone thinks I'm not a cool tech for using easily available objects at hand to do a good job. I can't be bothered. All right, so here's the output transformer, and just like that AC-15's choke yesterday, or day before yesterday, it had exposed high voltage connections here. In this case, it was the primaries and the HT center tap, and the bare metal, and you could reach in behind the amp to try to change a tube or something and kill yourself. It could never be sold today. This would be highly illegal, but it was 1966. Whatever, man. It's groovy. So there it is. And so what I've done, just like on the AC-15, is I put on this very unlovely red liquid electrical tape. And I built up 3 layers. And you could touch this with the amp is on now and not get zapped. And if you ever need to take it off, it literally comes off pretty much with your thumbnail without any damage to the surface beneath. It's just a rubber coating. But it works well. In a pinch, you could just use masking tape or painter's tape, but over time that dries out and gets weird and it's not as reliable. This can be undone very easily, and it's a good solution. On the secondary connection for the hot and negative, common and positive, the terminals themselves on this bit of phenolic had broken loose from people tugging, the speaker wire getting tugged on it over the years. So I gave just little bits of super glue to secure those so they don't have the wobbles anymore. And to take the strain off from wires tugging from the speakers, I ran a zip tie here and a zip tie here. So this cannot be tugged. And well, you can tug on it all you want, but it's not going to strain the connections here or break the output transformer. This is 18 gauge wire. It is pre-tinned stranded 18 gauge wire. It's very nice. I left it a little bit longer than I know I'll need it, so I'll have some flexibility to solder it to the speakers in the cab, and we'll make sure that I don't have too much excess, but I also want to have a little bit of slack so there's no tension on the solder joint on the speaker either. And I'll see if there's a little bit on the speaker frame where I could do a zip tie kind of strain relief as well. But first I need to make sure that those speakers are working and don't have any issues before I trust the output transformer and the tubes or anything else in the amp circuit to those 60-year-old speakers. So let's find out. Well, really good news for the owner. The speakers seem to be absolutely fine. Not only fine, but to sound really good. More testing will be required though. Ah, shucks. The one on the left is a Celestion G12. It has a ribbed cone and the hammer tone finish. I think this one's original to the amp. This is a Rolla G12, which should be the same speaker, though the cone seems to be either not ribbed or less ribbed, and it doesn't have the hammer tone finish. They both seem to sound great. I've not put my ear up against them individually. Maybe I'll let the mics do that later and see if we detect which, if either, is the better sounding one. I did have to replace the existing wiring joining the 2 speakers. It's a pretty typical connection here. It's parallel. So we've got 2 16-ohm speakers in parallel for a total load of 8. They were just tack soldered, and This one had some tension on it, so I replaced this one to get the tension off, and the new lead from the output transformer also doesn't have any tension, but there's not a lot of excess, so there's not a lot of weight on them either. These old Celestians, or these old Rolas in this case, have kind of like a J-hook thing where the speaker wire goes in, rather than a full lug like you'd expect on most other speakers, Current, Celestion, Eminence, Jensen, etc. So it's hard to fit two wires to one, because one side of them is used for the wires going to the speaker itself, and you don't want to disturb those solder joints, or if you do so, do it at your very much own risk. So I had to fit two 18-gauge wires onto these little J's, and the old wire was just all frayed out. So I was able to do it and get a secure connection to the J-hook on each one and soldered it neatly. I was going to show that, but it would take a long time, and it's really hard to get the light in there to show you guys. You've seen me solder speakers before. It's the same thing, just with a different kind of lug than the usual suspects. Anyway, let me try this little pad on this overhead mic, let you hear it, and then once I'm sure that everything's hunky-dory, we'll do a real playing test with the real mics and all that. This is just the overhead SE8. I'm really pleased with how it's sounding. I'm really glad that the speakers seem to be just fine. I did have to tighten one of the cheese head screws holding it to the baffle. It was a little bit loose. That gave me the excuse to say cheese head. If you watch this far in the video, put that in the comments. And I'm just tickled. I love it when an old amp like this comes back to life. I'm going to do some more testing on my own, playing tests to make sure I haven't missed anything. Once I'm sure that it's really ready for prime time, I'm going to get a local pro player to come over here and put this Marshall through its Marshally paces for everybody. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.